We started work on concepts for New Dawn sort of as Far Cry 5 was wrapping up. Something that the brand has wanted to do for a long time is a setting in a post-apocalyptic setting, and the ending of Far Cry 5 really facilitated that. So that really allowed us to sort of make Far Cry New Dawn as like this emblematic new world thing. The narrative team consulted with 2 meteorologists. These are specialists who focus on both volcanoes and nuclear, the potential fallout of a nuclear attack. Both of these things are similar because they send a lot of particles into the air, they change weather patterns, they change biomes as a result. And from them, we got some real-world inspiration as to the consequences on population, wildlife, geography, water cycles, all sorts of things. And that really informed how we sort of painted and built the geography of New Dawn in general. For example, one of the side effects of a nuclear fallout is desertification in certain places because the rain stops falling because the atmosphere is clogged with particles, essentially. So there is a real-life phenomenon that happens in deserts today called superbloom, where everything gets all dried up, there's dust and there's seeds and there's nutrients, and they're just dormant, they're doing nothing, and they, once the rain starts falling again, they burst back into life. And so at one point, Hope County itself was a desert, and then before our game starts, the sun and the rain returned, and life just burst out of the ground immediately. Yeah, one of the consequences of a nuclear fallout is flooding, either by lack of upkeep in infrastructure in cities, or a change in biomes in places causing different icy landscapes to melt, rain to fall in some places and not in others. So it generally, all sorts of water cycles are really affected, and the same thing happens in Hope County. Super bloom, as one of these sort of side effects, is something we really wanted to include. It was a really sort of base point inspiration, the idea of being able to see where there used to be large swaths of death. Like you can sort of see in New Dawn's setting big sort of piles of dust everywhere, but plants bursting out of that dust. You sort of see this legacy of death and the sort of promise of life coming out of it in the same shot. We also wanted to exemplify the idea of sort of colorfulness and one of the aspects of the game that brings out the colorfulness is our antagonists. The Highwaymen are sort of this roving band of land pirates, and they're all sort of peacocks. They are really big about their brand, and they paint everything to sort of mark their territory and warn people nearby that this is our territory and you better be aware. They put paint on their armor and themselves, and they play loud music, and they figure nothing matters, you might as well live as loudly and with as much color as possible. And that, combined with sort of the transformation of nature, really makes for a colorful setting. Well, we knew that we wanted to have a female villain, and we knew that we wanted to have twins. The reason for this is because historically, Far Cry as a brand has usually just been one-on-one interactions. The player with an antagonist trying to fill the screen, an antagonist that's trying to sort of be daunting to you. We really wanted to see what happened when we injected this familial nature into it by having 2 siblings who were antagonists. The idea that there are these 2 entities in front of you, each of them with their own sort of sub-philosophies, but with the same united goal. It presents a greater challenge in terms of mechanics. It creates a greater challenge thematically to have sort of 2 adversaries instead of 1, and it really sort of evolves and changes the dynamic of a Far Cry experience. You get to see that the twins were shaped by the world that they're living in New Dawn. They were just children when the bombs fell, and they were raised by the same person, but they do see the world a little bit differently. They see the world in conjunction with each other very effectively, because they run and they lead a huge group of people. They run a very darkly successful sort of movement in terms of gathering supplies, but it's very much at the cost of other people. How to do that, sometimes they both have different opinions in the nuances of how they can do it, and some differences of opinions in other things too, but I want to leave it for the experience of the game.
Nice. Now let's talk about the previous villain from Far Cry 5, the Father. How does he change in this game? Because his predictions about the end of the world seem to have come true, but it doesn't seem to be the world that he sort of expected.
Well, that's true partially. He sort of expected this world where all sinners would be gone, and that's not really what happened. There are survivors who were members of Hope County before. Excuse me. There are this group of people called Highwaymen who exemplify everything that he's decided to go against, because he now, the cult itself has evolved into something new. They call themselves New Eden, and they reject all things from the old world. They reject mechanized weapons. They reject technology. They reject. They live as simply as possible, very much under the belief that it was these things like technology that allowed the world to end so poorly earlier. So to have these people, they are perpetually living for the future, and Highwaymen are perpetually living for today, and those are diametrically opposed. So the Father has come back into this world where people like this have chapters all across the country. It isn't what he expected. A neutral entity in Hope County now, which is very difficult for some survivors of the timeline of the first game to accept. For example, Carmina's parents, Kim and Nick, they can't stand it when they see a member of the cult, and to Carmina's eyes, they're just these sort of odd but peaceful enough people who keep to themselves and farm and clothe their backs just like anybody else does. And it's just, they have become something so unrecognizable from before that someone who didn't know them from before would be hard-pressed to believe that they were so violent and awful. They've really evolved into something new. Hope County is a really wonderful cocktail of residual radiation and bliss. Something that happened a lot in the last game is that the water table and the earth was saturated in this mystery chemical. The cult made sure to do it pretty much everywhere, and that people don't really know bit by bit what was in the chemical compound of bliss, but there was sort of a residual leftover, and it really affected the wildlife in unpredictable ways, with whether it sort of made a motley of their fur or changed how they act at night. In our research, we sort of discovered that the larger and more complex an organism gets, the less likely it is to be affected by over multiple generations by radiation. It's more likely than not, it's a bit of a downer, the organism would die before it would be able to pass on any sort of mutation. So there are humans with sort of nuanced abilities, but these, I wouldn't exactly call them mutations, no. We do have multiple locations across the US, and we do have locations around Hope County that are very recognizable from Far Cry 5, sort of really buildings with strong silhouettes that are sort of changed, that are maybe half buried or covered in life. Those are really the places that you can emphasize or recognize from other experiences.